So, as it says here, I'm David Schlesinger, also known as Lefty. So if you hear people muttering about that bastard Lefty, that's me. I work for a company called Access, which part of which, at least, you may know as the company that was formerly known as PalmSource. Access acquired PalmSource in 2005, right around the time that we were getting rolling there on the development of a Linux-based operating system stack for mobile devices, and that's something that we're expecting to see coming out on phones this summer sometime, so we're at kind of an exciting moment for all of this. But the issue I want to get to, since we are clearly not the only ones who are working on phones these days to various degrees of excitement, is the sort of misuses and uses of the word open in this context. And we'll be contrasting a couple of different things. The fact is, we are in the middle of a battle. It's a battle for your attention. It is a battle for your time. It's a battle for the money in your wallet, and it's taking place on the street, in your car, wherever you happen to be with a mobile device. So, let me start out by pointing out that so-called smartphones, phones that you can add software to after you purchase them, shipments are growing like crazy. We're talking a little over 50,000 now. We're looking at 50 million this year. We're talking about well over 250 million total by 2010. Now, that in and of itself is not so exciting to us here until you start to look at the trend versus what's going on with, for instance, your desktop or laptop systems. Again, by 2010, we're going to be shipping more smartphones every year than they sell laptop systems and desktop systems put together. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. What's even more amazing is that Linux is expected to take an increasing market share. While we've been fighting an extreme uphill battle on the desktop and struggling to sort of maintain parity with the guys over on Infinite Loop and Mac OS X on the desktop, we are looking at the potential to take 50% share of this smartphone market space by 2010 with Linux-based systems, and that's astounding. What that translates into is something like Linux-based smartphone shipments of 130 million units a year by 2010. And that represents an unprecedented market for software writers. This is something that the open source world has never really seen. And it's an opportunity for all of us, or at least it represents potential opportunity, but it's an opportunity that can be divided up in ways that are less useful to us, perhaps, than others. So one of the things that Robert is going to tell you outside there is that Google had to reinvent everything outside of the Linux kernel because existing technologies, like the GNOME technologies, were, quote, too desktop-oriented. This is a canard. Your cell phone is, in fact, not your desktop system. I agree with that. There is something along the line of an order of magnitude between a current desktop system like the Apple Mac Pro on the one hand and a top-of-the-line cell phone like the Nokia N95. Instead of having a CPU that runs at gigahertz, you've got one that runs at megahertz. Instead of memory that's measured in gigabytes, you've got memory in megabytes. Instead of a 30-inch screen, you've got a 3-inch screen. Instead of 120 keys on your keyboard, you've got something like 12 or 20. Moore's law is still our friend, as you'll see in the subsequent slide. Equipment keeps getting more powerful as time goes on. The fact is that other laws of physics may not be. Trying to cram that kind of computing power down into a space that size brings problems of heat. You've got problems around battery life, which you don't have to worry about with machines that plug into the wall, so on and so forth. But the interesting observation is that while the cell phone is not your desktop system that you have today, it's kind of the one you used to have 5 years ago. If you compare that same Nokia N95 to the machine that I was using 5 years ago, a Mac Pro G4 Tower, Macintosh ran at 350 megahertz. The Nokia runs at 330. The Macintosh had 64 meg of RAM. The Nokia's got twice that. The Mac had a rapid 6 gigabyte hard disk, which I thought I'd never fill. I was was wrong about that, but the Nokia's got effectively an 8 gigabyte hard disk. And I don't have to worry about like impacts on it or anything because it's all solid state. The Mac got Ethernet at 10 megabits per second. We've got Wi-Fi at 54, and we've got Bluetooth, and we've got GPS. And let us not forget, it's also a cell phone. That was something you couldn't do on your Mac. The really interesting part for me is that the Mac cost $2,500 in 2001. The Nokia, and this is an out-of-date price, it's much cheaper today, $625, a quarter the cost. And of course, the Nokia includes a monitor. So we are entering a time of increasingly seamless and ubiquitous connectivity. We can connect to anyone, anywhere, from wherever we happen to be. We can connect to them in more ways than we've ever thought possible. We have access to data of all kinds, anytime we want. More kinds of data, coming from more sources. Now, this frees us up in ways we couldn't imagine. I have an office in Sunnyvale, at least I did the last time I was there. That was probably a month and a half ago. But it doesn't matter because I can do my work from wherever I am. If it doesn't matter where you are, where you need to be to get your work done, then you can be where you want to be more. And I can be more in places like Tokyo or Amsterdam, and that's fine with me. Rather than being the slave of things like location and time, having to be in a particular place at a particular time, location and time will increasingly serve our needs rather than us serving theirs. Maybe. This is, by the way, what the Internet looked like 8 years ago. It's gotten much, much, much worse since then. Increasing complexity makes life harder. You have to be aware of the potential of what's going on. Effectively, I am a cloud, a variety of devices. I've got a cell phone, I've got a laptop, I've got a web tablet, I've got various other machines, I've got servers that I store data on. But, for instance, I can take a photograph of somebody's business card with my Nokia E65, use software that OCRs the business card, stuffs it into my contacts, ActiveSync pushes it up to an Exchange server, and it gets pulled down to my laptop. So I've got the same data no matter where I am. I interact with your and your private devices and data, and we can share information increasingly. I've got a variety of identities that are distributed around a variety of places. I have a social identity that's on my phone and my contacts. I've got one on Facebook, one in LinkedIn. I've got a culinary identity in a way when I do reviews of restaurants on sites like Yelp. I've got a travel identity, and I travel a lot on places like Doppler and Sidestep, United, you name it. I've got a musical identity on Last.fm, Pandora, I've got various identities on Amazon, eMusic. If we could express these identities and then add in things like where I am now, what I'm doing, who I am, things can get really, really exciting. What happens when everything can talk to everything else? Maybe I don't need to go out and look for things that interest me. Maybe they start looking for me instead. And isn't that exciting? So, we got a lot of players in mobile space right now. And I'm going to talk about three in particular. I want to talk about the iPhone first, since this has really captured people's imagination. The iPhone has raised the bar significantly on what people expect from a phone, and that is a good thing. They have done it at the cost of a system that is so closed that you could not squeeze a playing card into it. And that's a bad thing. However, like I keep telling people, do not mistake the iPhone for your phone just because you paid for it. It's Steve's phone. He's just letting you use it. Okay? Apple is very, very good at this kind of innovation. They're very, very bad about reacting to the inevitable imitation and co-option that comes from every other manufacturer in the world after that. The typical reaction is to stand around and go, how can they buy stuff from those guys? We did it first! And I speak from experience. I I worked at Apple 10 years, okay? So I've seen this. I saw Mac OS market share go from 22%, believe it or not, the biggest personal computer manufacturer in the entire world in 1991, down to 3 in 1996. And you know what did it? Windows 3.1. All you have to have is something that was 70% as good, at 60% of the cost, and all those fickle early adopters run for the hills. Expect it to happen again. Because other phone manufacturers don't need the 50% margins that Apple expects. They're more than happy to get supermarket margins like 5%, 3%, and they will undersell Apple to death. Like I say, you can always tell the pioneers by the arrows in their backs. And Apple is going to have to work very, very hard to stay ahead of Samsung, LG, Nokia, Motorola. You can go down the list of top phone manufacturers. These are companies that make phones for a living. Nokia sells as many phones on a good holiday weekend as Apple has sold in their entire existence, and that is not going to change soon. So they're fighting a hard, hard battle. Big question in my mind, now that we've seen the SDK, is it who's going to win, the iTunes App Store or the jailbreakers? My money's on the jailbreakers because they're not asking for 30% on the dollar. And that's going to make a big, big difference. Let's take a quick look at the Open Handset Alliance and Android, which my pal Robert's talking about out there. If you were in here, you'd be throwing shit at me. That's all right. So, we all know how much the open source community loves code dumps. Android is the million-line code dump. It is a code dump the size that nobody has ever seen before. Once you get outside the Linux kernel, there is not a line of code to speak of that you're familiar with or have ever heard of. Everything had to be rewritten from scratch. All your code will have to be rewritten from scratch unless you happen to write in their dialect of Java. But that's what they want to do. Standard, kinda, it's Java, but it's not in the Java community process. It's Linux, but we're not using Linux in any way that you've ever seen. It's open source, except the code isn't open and you can't see it yet, so on and so forth. But this doesn't surprise me. We have to remember Google's core business is selling billboard space on the information highway. It's a fact of life. That's what they're about. That's the only business that they're really in. So trust them, they're in advertising. Questions about the business model. Who's giving away what? There are a lot of people, a lot of companies in the Open Handset Alliance. It remains to be seen how free any of that stuff is going to be. I'm not quite sure what Nuance is going to be left with as a business model if they give away their voice recognition engine, because that's all they currently sell today. So unless they're planning on becoming a charity or being acquired by Google maybe, it's unclear to me how they would make any money. What's free? I guess anything that asks you to part with an amount of money that you don't care much about is free. It gets a little weirder when they're asking for screen space or attention or time. Ad-based phones. Is that the direction of the future? I don't mind ads on my laptop because I've got a big screen and I can ignore them. I think they're going to be much harder to ignore on that 3-inch screen. And we've seen experiments with ad-based devices. We had a raft of them in the 90s. People were giving away PCs, and all you had to do was put up with advertisements, and they went nowhere. I don't know if an ad-based phone is going to do any better. Here's the Android's dilemma. You can put out code under all the open source licenses you want, but you can't create a community around it by fiat. You can't say, here's some code, here's a license, make a community. Please, do our work. It's not going to happen. I don't expect that GTK developers are going to stop working on GTK in order to support Surface Manager on Google's behalf. At best, GTK developers will swoop in and steal the parts of Surface Manager that they think are worth using and incorporate them into GTK, which they can do. It's under an Apache license, so no harm, no foul, really. But it ain't going to help Android any. So Google is about to find out how to be open source and still be proprietary. Where's the both words? I always always say that the sort of key phrase that we've come to kind of implicitly understand about open source is that it tends to be 80% as good as the last guy who worked on it needed it to be. And that won't fly on your mom's cell phone. That's not an adequate standard. The problem with being proprietary is you end up doing all the heavy lifting all by yourself. So there'll have code out there that people can look at, steal with, run away from, or do whatever they want with, and they'll still wind up doing all the heavy lifting, I expect. So it's going to be interesting. Now, our heroes, GNOME Mobile. I'm on the GNOME Foundation Advisory Board, and I've been involved in the GNOME Mobile Initiative since April of 2 years ago and before. We actually publicly announced it, I guess, April last year, and we started it at Glottic the year before that. But this is a mainstream common ground that underlies lots of effort that's going on in the mobile community right now. My company's product, the Access Linux platform, is all based on GNOME technologies. Moblin from Intel, all based on GNOME technologies. Ubuntu Mobile, same thing. OpenMoko, same thing. Limo Foundation, same thing. Plus a lot of other stuff that you probably haven't heard of yet. And it's all based on those supposedly two desktop-centric technologies. So, GTK, GStreamer, Bluesy, SQLite, Dbus, Matchbox, plenty of stuff that you've heard of. And trust me, regardless of what Google wants you to believe, it works fine on cell phones. We've been shipping cell phones on this software for a couple of years now in Japan. So, if somebody has an existence proof of why this can't possibly be made to work, I'm more than happy to provide my proof of my defying the laws of physics somehow. Don't ask me how it happens, it just does.
Is there any phones in the U.S. available using it?
Yeah, Motorola has a number of phones that are based on Linux. The Razr 2, for instance, is a Linux-based phone.
What is using this? No?
I believe the Razr 2 is. Earlier Motorola phones were based on QT and UIQ. But we're going to be seeing more and more GTK-based stuff coming out. We've got a phone coming out in Europe from Samsung this summer that's all based on like the latest up-to-date versions of this software. So, and there'll be more. So lots of approaches. I've got a little scorecard that I put together as to who's open. Now, you can look at open in a variety of ways. What does it mean? Is it open source software? In other words, can you look at the code? Apple iPhone? Ha, no. Android? Only if you work at Google so far. Apparently, they'll open source the code when phones ship, but who knows when that's liable to be. They tell me 2008. Samsung tells me 2009. I don't know. Sometime. GNOME mobile platform? You bet. You can download the source today. Is the development process for the platform itself open? In other words, can you participate in the development of the operating system? Apple, only if you work at Apple. Google, Android, only if you work at Google. GNOME Mobile, same open source. You know, you guys know where to go. You know what to do. Do they have an open development environment? Can you use the languages and tools of your choice? Apple iPhone, not really. If you like Objective-C and that's the tool of your choice, you're good to go. If you like Java, then you're okay with Android as long as you don't mind, their particular dialect of Java. Again, on the GNOME mobile platform, it's all the standard stuff. C, C++, Java, web widgets, Ruby, Perl, you name it. All of this can be done easily in this environment. Do we have open APIs, file formats, and protocols? Apple iPhone? No, not a chance. Android, they're documented, but they're in kind of a take-them-or-leave-them fashion. You don't have any particular input into what Google's doing with that. Maybe you can start hacking on the code someday when they release it, but not before then. Mobile? Yeah, it's all out there. It's all the same open source code you're used to. Are they open for business? Apple iPhone opens up in June for $99 plus 30% on the dollar of your revenue. Android, someday, again, nobody's articulated a real business model around how developers are going to use Android or make money on it. GNOME mobile platform, as I say, phones are starting to come out. They've already been coming out. The phones that you're going to be seeing in the future are going to be increasingly open to third-party development, and that's a big win. It's an especially big win when you consider that these phones are using the same APIs that developers are using on the desktop. It's GTK, it's GStreamer, it's POSIX APIs. You don't have a huge learning curve here. And that's a huge, huge advantage. Anybody here played with the Android SDK? No?
What is the iPhone SDK?
Android SDK. Okay, did anybody ever play with Mac App in 1995? No? It's one of these massive object-oriented frameworks. You have to forget everything you knew about how programs work in order to write code for it. This is the Android approach. All object-oriented. You're going to love it. So it'll only take you like 6 or 8 months to learn. So don't feel bad. So let's talk about device security. We've got various approaches going on here. The iPhone, security, via gluing the case shut. Don't go looking there. It's none of your business. This is proven not to work well, as we've seen by the fact that people were able to hack the Beta 2.0 SDK within, 35 minutes of its coming out? So that doesn't seem like a tenable approach, really. Google takes an interesting approach with Android. They approach security by making it your problem. Okay? So what happens is a little alert will come up saying, do you want to allow this application access to your contacts? And being dopey, you'll go, oh, okay, we all understand social engineering, right? So you don't realize you have a problem until you get the $3,000 phone bill at the end of the month. And when you go and complain to Google, they'll say, well, you shouldn't have said yes, dude. So, not a problem. I see trouble ahead. Mainstream mobile Linux utilizes the well-accepted security approaches that are used by things like SE Linux and what have you. We've got a really solid security system built into Linux at this point, and we can really leverage it to produce fine-grained policy-based security. So that through a combination of policies, signatures, certificates, we can establish beforehand that thus and such an application may or may not do this or may optionally do that. But we can completely bar, for instance, unsigned applications from doing things that would end up costing you $3,000 at the end of the month. There are examples of this out there. Our Hiker project has a policy-based security component. That's up at hikerproject.org. Bitfrost from OLPC. So, you know, this is not real new stuff. Why does community matter? Community is what enables and drives the virtuous cycle of having a good platform that leads to more application development, which leads to demand for platform improvements, which leads to more platform sales, which leads to more applications. Reference implementations have to have some kind of a community. Somebody's got to support them. Somebody's got to improve things. Somebody's got to find bugs. Right now, we're sort of at the Berkeley documentation phase. You know, the documentation is the source code. The code is the standard. And if you want to work with that standard, you work with the people who own the code, and that's the community. Okay? Right now, the only community around Android, the platform, as opposed to applications development, is Google. Okay? It's going to stay that way for a long time. Yeah?
Going back to the security slide for a second, and this kind of ties into the community one as well, I suppose. It seems like that type of security model can be used to protect the user from threats that they would want to be protected from, but it can also be used to protect the carrier's hardware from a user who knows.
Sure.
It's my impression that that's kind of how the Motorola Linux phones that run Access Mobile stuff have been so far. Is that the case? Or?
That can be the case if you buy your phone through a carrier, sure. I don't buy phones from carriers. I just have an account with a carrier that gives me a SIM card that I can put into whatever unlocked phone I want.
So what Motorola or what other phone would you recommend to run Access Linux on to actually get access to it myself? I
don't recommend anything today because they haven't started coming out yet, but as soon as Samsung starts selling unlocked i800s, I'd buy one of those in a minute. So, I mean, it depends on what you want out of life. You can buy an Open Moco phone today, and you will be able, actually, in a little time, I think, to put the Access Linux platform on that. So, and if you put, the basic platform with no policies on it, then it's on you what you allow to run on there.
So then all the open source stuff actually does become user modifiable open source?
All the open source stuff, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so skipping ahead. So, like I say, it's not enough to demand that people become a community. If you limit what people can do and the ways in which they can do it, you're limiting your ecosystem. That's pretty straightforward. So Apple is saying, hey, all you guys, no background threading, sorry. Tough. Let's deal with it. You can write a letter to Steve, but I promise you it won't help. I've argued with Steve. It's not a rewarding exercise. I didn't even lose. I didn't win. I got to keep my badge, which was kind of a win. That surprised my manager. Okay. There is not the open source community. There are lots of communities. There is a GTK community, a kernel community, a GStreamer community, a BlueZ community, a Java community. You've got to be able to deal usefully with all of them. You can't concentrate on one to the exclusion of the others, and you can't expect the open source community to sort of carve out resources and just help you with whatever you happen to throw out under the Apache license or what have you. Toss it over the wallware is never a good idea. Back in the early days of the Nokia 770, Nokia had something like 50,000 lines of what were really good patches for GTK, but they just kind of took them and heaved them over into the project, and it took Nokia a good year and a half to recover from that, even though the code was good, just because they did it in the wrong way. Now, again, a million-line code dump is not going to fly with hardly anybody. Nobody's got the time. Placing artificial constraints on your developers, unless absolutely necessary, is never a good idea. Okay? You throttle innovation that way. I'm a big believer in the Taoist theory of management. Find a good parade and get in front of it. Works for me. So open source development has proven over time to be one of the best parades going, which is why I love what I do. We can share the development cost among a raft of engineers, more people than we could possibly hire, and better people than we could hire in a lot of instances. We can share the quality burden. People find bugs for us and tell us about them. I don't have to hire as many QA folks as I had to. Most importantly, it allows for innovation from unexpected directions. And this is, again, what I'm talking about when I say you don't want to throttle your third-party development environment. On a closed playing field, I firmly believe that open will always beat out closed. And I think in a year or two, we'll see positive proof of that. When you see what kind of open source-based phones are out there, I think that phones based on software like GNOME Mobile are going to kick Android's ass, frankly. We'll see. It'll be interesting. So, what can the future hold for us? I'm going to Istanbul this summer. I've never been to Istanbul.
It's great.
I hear that, and I'm bringing my camera because I'm a big photographer, and I think there's lots of stuff. But there may, in fact, be a Japanese restaurant in Istanbul someplace. I love Japanese food. I work for a Japanese company, so I get to eat a lot of it, and I love miso ramen. And I'll go anywhere for miso ramen. Now, if there were a way to sort of RSS these things out to the world, you know, when I step off the plane, an alert goes out, somebody will like miso ramen, just that I'm it's possible that the miso ramen place could directly send me some kind of a 25% off coupon just to get me to come in. And goddamn it, I'd do it. I'd do it just to see what miso ramen in Istanbul was like. And it's a win for everybody. I get 25% off my miso ramen. They get a new customer. We're all happy. So this is what's possible when things open up. Yeah?
Some users might regard that as spam.
Some users might regard that as spam, and that's an interesting point. Now, what I foresee in a perfect world is something along the lines of what Doc Searles has been referring to as, in contrast with customer relationship management, vendor relationship management. So let's say that there were, in fact, a mechanism whereby I could filter incoming offers like this only to places that had a high rating on a variety of sites. People had actually eaten there and actually liked the food. So if it hasn't gotten like a 4-star rating or better, maybe I'll never see it.
So it would be like a spam whitelist or something.
Something like that, you know.
A good economic incentive to game your rating system then.
Well, there are always ways to game a system. But I don't know if anybody has read the book that movie 21 was based on. But, here are guys who are gaming Las Vegas big time. And it's all legal. It's all math, So potentially, yeah, there are problems, but potentially there are interesting solutions around this as well. But what really excites me are the possibilities of it. There's a distinct difference here between the kind of horizontal ad placement that you see when you do a Google search, for instance, where it's just driving off random keywords, and the kind of more vertical search that I'm really interested in. I mean, a good example of the contrast there is if you go to Google, I'm going to Amsterdam sometime, so I want a plane ticket to Amsterdam. If I type plane ticket to Amsterdam into Google, I'll get 14 million hits. Now, which of those can actually sell me a plane ticket? Which of those will actually give me a good price on a plane ticket? You could spend the rest of your life. Okay? Instead, you see sites like Sidestep, where it's a vertical search. It's all about airplane tickets. And what they do is they go out to every airline site in the world, every travel site in the world, Expedia, Orbitz, United, American, you name it. They collect all of the plane fares that fit my parameters and let me sort them and filter them in various interesting ways. So I can figure out, okay, I don't like nonstops. I like to get there at 3 in the afternoon so I can check right into my hotel what meets those parameters most closely, and that's a useful kind of search. Mobile advertising will only work, in my opinion, with a very, very vertically driven search. It's got to be very targeted. You've got a 3-inch screen there, and ads will drive people nuts if they don't make sense for you. So, the comment about spam is really important, I think. There are, various ways you might deal with it, and I don't have easy answers for them, but I know what won't work. So that's basically what I had to say. I think that openness is the direction to go. Openness will open doors. I think that reinventing wheels is never a good idea. I think that distracting people away from the mainstream is likewise not a good idea. So I'm here to sort of beat the drum for mainstream open source-based mobile development, and hopefully I've made a vaguely persuasive case to you guys, or at least entertained you for half an hour. So that's it. Thanks.